Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Miles, the IIS Interoperability Specialist for the Immunization Unit. I've been with the unit about 2.5 years now, and in my current role, I'm responsible for establishing and maintaining the electronic connections that exist between some of your EMR systems and the Immunization Registry, as well as the quality of that data exchange. The purpose of this presentation today is to answer some general questions about establishing a connection and to familiarize you all with the process. So what is an interface? What is any of this stuff that I constantly talk about? As I'm sure you might have noticed, once we engage in conversation about these connections, it's really easy to get lost in a sea of terminology. There are a couple key terms to know, beginning with interface. What the heck does interface even mean? An interface is a point where two systems meet and interact. So it's quite literally an electronic connection between two systems. An interface can be unidirectional, meaning information only flows one direction. So data is sent from one system and received by the other system. An interface can also be bidirectional, meaning that information is sent and received by both systems. For the purposes of this conversation, one of those two systems is our IIS, which stands for Immunization Information System. In Wyoming, we've nicknamed our IIS the WyIR, which stands for Wyoming Immunization Registry. An IIS at its core is a centralized population-based repository of immunization-related information. The other one of those two systems that we're talking about is your EMR or EHR system, which stands for Electronic Health or Electronic Medical Record System. Pretty interchangeable terms. There are many different vendors for EMR systems, such as Epic or Cerner, and not all necessarily created equal, but at their core, they're all a collection of patient and population health information in a digital format. Which brings us to interoperability. Interoperability is the ability of a computer system or software to exchange and make use of information. So the WyIR is an interoperable system, your EMRs are interoperable systems. And the last term you should familiarize yourself with is HL7 message. HL7 stands for Health Level 7, which is a nationally recognized standard for electronic data exchange between systems housing healthcare data. It defines a syntax or a grammar for formulating messages that carry this information. So in simpler terms, HL7 is the language that our systems use to communicate with each other. So how does an interface work? First off, your facility staff, your EMR vendor, and myself have to work together to establish the interface by completing the onboarding process. We'll touch a little more on the details of that process later in this presentation. But once we've completed the setup process and we've got that working connection, a patient visits your facility, is evaluated, is administered any necessary vaccines, and then someone records that encounter in your EMR system. Now, based on the information or the data entered into your EMR, the system automatically creates an HL7 message and sends it over the interface. A few seconds later, the message is received by the WyIR, and the WyIR then reads it and evaluates it. If the WyIR doesn't find anything wrong or missing in the message, it approves it and places the vaccination event in the WyIR where you as a user can then see it. If it does find something missing or wrong, it'll return a warning or an error back to your EMR. In the case of an error, the message is blocked entirely. So an example of this would be if you send me a message without a patient's first name. We would block that message and then send an error back that says patient first name is missing. A patient's name is pretty integral and we wouldn't want a record floating around with just a last name attached. And for this reason, we return that error. In the case of a warning, it does place the vaccination event in the WyIR just like a successful message, but returns that warning message to your EMR to inform staff that the data just wasn't quite up to par. So a good example of this would be if the patient's race was unrecognized. So for some reason, your system sent a race that our system couldn't read. And since this doesn't much impact the actual vaccine information, we accept the message on that basis. But we return a warning to you that says patient race was unrecognized so that you then have that information and can possibly correct any problems that are causing it. And with that said, we know every EMR is different and your system actually may or may not show you what happened to the message that you created and sent. For this reason, the WyIR provides an error report at the end of every month that lists all of the warnings and errors that came of your data throughout the month. It's your staff's responsibility to make any necessary corrections based on error and warning messages. And that's really that. Of course, there's little things that can go wrong here and there, and we'll have to work with your staff or your EMR vendor to work those out. But this is how a well-oiled interface works. Now, There is one more added step if the interface is bidirectional. So if you remember from our terms, that means that data can be sent from the WyIR back to your EMR system. So what does that mean exactly? In this process that we've reviewed, it means that the patient arrives for their visit or even during their exam, the clinician sends what we call a query message for the patient. A query message asks the WyIR to search for and hopefully send back the patient's immunization history and or their vaccination forecast. If the WyIR has this information in its database, then it sends it back and the EMR populates the patient record with that new data. And this is great because it allows the patient to have one complete and consistent record across all the systems, which is better for everybody. So why do all this? What is the true value of maintaining one of these connections? If you've not already picked up on it, it will save you time, which I know is invaluable to all of you guys. Maintaining an interface saves staff from having to enter vaccinations into both your EMR system and into the WyIR in order to meet mandatory reporting standards. And if you've got that bidirectional interface, staff is also saved from having to log into the WyIR to obtain the patient's vaccination history and forecast. And with no reason to log into the WyIR, you also eliminate the need for managing user access. So having to add staff, make sure they keep their accounts active, remove staff, all of that stuff goes away. Another more big picture reason for an interface is the goal of data saturation. Sharing data easily between healthcare systems results in more complete and accurate records in all of the connected systems. So less confusion over my system says this, but their system says that, or feeling the need to search everywhere to verify somebody's history. Theoretically, if we were able to establish quality connections with every facility throughout the state and everyone was reporting all of the data in their systems and pulling back anything they were missing, eventually the likelihood that each patient has the same information in each system is much, much higher. And as I'm sure many of you realize, that's far from our current reality where patients can jump from provider to provider and not manage any of their own health information and end up with quite a mess in many different systems. And finally, for those of you that manage vaccine inventory in the WyIR, another perk is automated inventory management. An interface assists staff with maintaining an accurate inventory. So what will your staff have to do exactly? The lion's share of the work for an interface happens at the beginning while we're setting things up. We refer to this process as onboarding. One or more members of your staff will be required to work together with your EMR vendor staff and myself to complete the onboarding process. If you have IT staff to dedicate to this process, that is wonderful, but definitely not a requirement. You don't really need any expertise to engage in this process, just a willingness to learn and some time to dedicate to onboarding. Otherwise, that's truly what I'm here for. I'm here to help explain this stuff to you guys and help and support you throughout the life of your interface. With that said, the process of onboarding will take several weeks to several months and be dependent on staff engagement and how quickly we can get your interface working well enough to be approved to go live. You may need to attend a couple of meetings with me. You may need to work out some issues with your EMR vendor. You may need to educate your staff on proper data entry. But the true goal of onboarding is to A, set up the connection, and then B, thoroughly test it and resolve any problems to be sure that once we make it live, it works correctly and the data that comes through is up to par. We do this because it's a lot harder and a lot more stressful on staff if we set up a live connection that has issues. A bad interface can really be more work than it's worth, which brings us to connection maintenance. Once we've wrapped up that onboarding process, meaning your connection works great, your data looks great, we make your connection live. This means that your patients' immunizations will start showing up in the WyIR, and it's now your job to maintain your interface. Because as all technology does, occasionally the interface may need some updates or some fixes made to it, and it's your responsibility to communicate with me and your vendor about any issues and then ensure that they get taken care of. Most of the time, it's difficult or impossible for me to identify issues or problems with your data without your help. So for example, from my side, everything may seem great. I may see messages coming from your facility on a regular basis. There's no major failures, etc. But then you'll email me and you'll say, only about half of my patients seem to be showing up in the WyIR. And so we'll look into it and we may find out that, yeah, you've actually got a problem and maybe your messages got stuck in your EMR system and they never came over to the WyIR. And this will probably require you to open a ticket with your vendor and then be sure that they implement a fix for us. But again, we'll always work together and I'm here to help. You won't be left alone trying to figure this stuff out and identify what your problems are. But at the end of the day, the interface and your data is your responsibility to stay on top of. The other ongoing responsibility you'll have is error correction. So as I mentioned previously, sometimes your messages will be returned to you with errors or warnings. Once a month, you and anybody else you designate will receive that report from me detailing the messages you sent throughout the previous 30 days. And of those messages, which ones had issues and then what those issues were. It's then your responsibility to follow up on those, whether that means making a correction and resubmitting a message, or again, sometimes opening a ticket with your EMR vendor to correct something that just isn't working quite right. Alrighty, so how do you get an interface? If your facility is interested in connecting, the first thing you want to do is engage your EMR vendor. Get a hold of them, ask lots of questions if you have them. Probably discuss primarily about the cost involved with setting this up. You know, what type of connections do they offer? Do they do the unidirectional or do they offer the bidirectional connections? As well as what type of support they'll be giving you, all of those kinds of things. And if everything checks out, they're ready to connect now, you guys are ready to go, then you'll want to register your intent to connect with the WyIR. You do this by filling out a form found on our website, and this just alerts us that your facility is ready to go. And depending on how many facilities we currently have onboarding or other competing priorities, you may be placed on a brief wait list until we're able to dedicate the necessary time and resources to your connection. Because again, we really don't just connect and walk away. We truly spend some time ensuring that your connection works exactly the way that it should and is helpful to your facility. Aside from registering your intent to onboard, you'll also want to decide who from your team will be heading up this work. That person may want to read through our WyIR onboarding guide, which is also found on our website, so they can kind of prepare themselves for the steps of the process. And that's basically it. You know, when onboarding begins, we'll start that by setting up a meeting with your staff, your EMR vendor, and myself, and then we'll answer any questions you have. We'll get everybody on the same page, and from that point forward, I'll be there with you guys to help you through all of this. Again, we don't expect you to be technical geniuses. There will be a few things to learn along the way, but you'll never be on your own struggling to figure this stuff out and struggling to pass through this process. So I am here for you. Now, normally this would have been an open Q&A session with all of you guys, but since we are living in the age of social distancing and we've had to move this to an online platform, this looks a little different this year. If you do have questions for me, I'm holding virtual office hours tomorrow, Thursday, May 14th from 10 to 11 a.m. Details about that can be located on the conference page of our website. Or, as always, I encourage you guys to reach out to me directly. You're always welcome to call me or email me, whether or not you even have a connection yet. If you just want to ask some questions or talk through this stuff, or ask about what the heck your vendor told you about this, whatever it is, I am here for you. So give me a call, shoot me an email. And with that said, I thank you guys all for your time, and I hope to hear from you soon.